Hey there, amazing listeners. If you're loving these heartwarming tales of unbreakable family bonds and second chances, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next one that'll leave you smiling through tears. The sound of her hand meeting my cheek was like a whip crack, sharp and absolute, tearing through the polite hum of the reception. For one impossible moment, the world went silent. The string quartet's melody fractured mid-note. 100 conversations died in 100 throats. Even the air in that cavernous museum hall, thick with the scent of lilies and champagne, seemed to freeze. I could feel the heat of her fingers blooming on my skin, a five-pointed star of shame that burned hotter than any coal stove back home. My eyes were wide, and I'm sure they looked terrified, like a deer caught in the blinding glare of a car it never saw coming. I couldn't blink. I couldn't breathe. Then her voice, a shard of ice in the suffocating quiet, twisted the knife. She wasn't looking at me, but at my son Jack, who stood on the stage across the room. Her face, so perfectly beautiful just moments before, was a mask of practiced hysteria. "Jack, darling," she cried, a sob catching in her throat. "I don't know how she even got in here. She must be one of the catering staff. Get her out, please just get her out." The lie was more stunning than the slap. To be called clumsy, a country woman, that was one thing. But to be erased, to be rendered a stranger in front of my own son by the woman he had just married, it stole the air from my lungs. I was kneeling on the cold marble, my dress soaked with champagne, my hands hovering over 1,000 glittering pieces of what used to be a champagne flute. And in that moment, I was nobody. But then I heard it, a sound that cut through her performance, through the whispers that were just starting to ripple through the crowd. It was Jack's voice, and it was a voice I hadn't heard since he was a 16-year-old boy standing up to a lone shark on our front porch. It was low, dangerously quiet, and colder than a West Virginia winter. "Sarah," he said, and the silence that followed was absolute. "What did you just do?" He wasn't asking a question. He was passing a sentence. And I knew right then that while she may have shattered a glass, she had just destroyed a life, her own. My name is Betty Johnson, and I am 68 years old. Before I was the mother of a billionaire, before my face was splashed across every gossip website in the world, I was the wife of a coal miner. My husband, Robert, was a man carved from the same Appalachian mountains that eventually claimed him. He had a laugh that could shake the dust from the rafters, and hands so calloused they felt like warm stones in mine. The cold took him from me, not all at once in a thunderous cave-in, but slowly, piece by piece. The doctors had a fancy name for it: pneumoconiosis, black lung. I called it what it was, murder by inches. Every cough that rattled his chest, every night he fought for a breath that wouldn't come, was a piece of him being stolen away. After he was gone, I was left with our son Jack and a mountain of debts that looked as tall and unforgiving as the one that had taken my husband. Medical bills, funeral costs. It felt like we were being buried right alongside him. Jack was 14 with his father's quiet determination and a mind that was too bright for our dying town. I'd watch him at the kitchen table, the yellow light from our one good lamp falling on his face as he read library books held together with tape and hope. And I made a promise to Robert's memory. The mountain would not take my son, too. So I worked. Have you ever been so tired that your bones feel like they're humming a sad song? That was my life for the next decade. My day started before the sun rose at the diner on Main Street, the one with the cracked red vinyl booths that always smelled of stale coffee and grease. I'd spend 8, sometimes 10 hours on my feet, smiling and pouring coffee that tasted a little like rust for men who reminded me so much of Robert. Good men with tired eyes, and not enough left over to tip more than a few coins. My back ached, my feet swelled, but I never complained. I'd take those coins and tuck them away like precious jewels. When the diner closed, my work wasn't done. I'd drive my old rattling Ford to the next town over, the one where the families still had money, and I'd clean their houses. I scrubbed their toilets, mopped their floors, and washed their windows until I could see my own exhausted reflection. The smell of bleach became my perfume. My hands, oh, my hands. They were a road map of my sacrifice. Cracked, bleeding, raw from the chemicals. I'd hide them in my apron pockets when Jack was home. I never wanted him to see the price of his future. I didn't want him to know how much it hurt. He was a good boy. He studied while I worked. His teachers saw the gift in him, a spark that could light up the world if it was just given a chance. They told me about advanced placement courses, about scholarships, about a world beyond our hollow. But everything cost money. Every opportunity had a price tag I couldn't afford. I'll never forget the day I had to go to the high school to ask for an extension on his course fees. It was a crisp October afternoon, the kind where the air smells of wood smoke and dying leaves. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one I'd worn to Robert's funeral. It felt like I was burying a piece of my pride that day, too. The principal, a man named Harold Bennett, with thin hair and a way of looking down his nose that made you feel small, listened to my plea. I can still hear my own voice, how it trembled just a little when I promised I'd pay in installments. I hated that tremor. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance, like I was a problem he didn't have time for. He made me sign a paper, a formal agreement, as if my word, the word of a woman who worked 20 hours a day, wasn't good enough. He made me feel like I was begging for charity, not fighting for my son's life. What I didn't know was that Jack had come to the school to bring me my coat because he'd noticed I'd forgotten it. He stood in the hallway outside that office. He heard every condescending word from Principal Bennett. He heard the crack in my voice when I whispered, "Thank you." He saw me walk out with my shoulders held unnaturally straight, my hands tucked deep into my pockets to hide their shame. He never told me he was there, not for years, but I know now that something inside of him changed that day. The quiet determination he'd inherited from his father ignited into a blazing fire. He wasn't just going to get out, he was going to win. He did, but winning came with its own kind of costs. The first time he brought me to New York, I felt like I'd landed on another planet. He flew me on a private plane. Me. Betty Johnson, who had never been on a plane in her life, stepping onto a polished tarmac with a single battered suitcase that held everything I owned. His penthouse apartment was bigger than any 3 houses in my town put together. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a sea of green called Central Park. The floors were cold white marble, and the furniture was so sleek and modern. It looked like it was meant to be admired, not lived in. There were people there, staff, a woman who cleaned, a man who cooked. They did the things I had spent my entire life doing. My hands, which had never been still, suddenly had nothing to do. It was a strange kind of torture. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning, my body still tuned to the rhythm of the diner, and I'd find myself in the silent, gleaming kitchen, wanting to make coffee before I remembered someone else was paid to do that. I'd fold laundry I found in the dryer, only to have the housekeeper look at me with confusion, as if I'd broken some unspoken rule. Jack found me on my knees one afternoon, scrubbing the guest bathroom tile. "Mom," he said, his voice gentle, "you don't have to do that anymore." I looked up at him, at this wonderful man I had raised, and said, "Son, it just feels good to keep my hands busy." Then came Sarah. She was like a creature from one of the glossy magazines she wrote for, tall, impossibly thin, with a curtain of dark hair that fell perfectly around a face that had never known a day of hardship. She came from what they called old money, the kind of wealth that's so ingrained, it's just part of their DNA. She was perfect for Jack, for his new life. She smiled at me with perfectly white teeth and told everyone how inspiring my story was, a real-life rags to riches tale. She said it like she was proud. But her eyes were always cold. When Jack wasn't in the room, the little corrections would start. The way I pronounced a word, the simple cut of my dresses. She'd suggest shopping trips to stores where the price of a single scarf could have paid our mortgage for 3 months. She said it all with a syrupy sweetness, as if she were just trying to help me fit in. But it felt less like help and more like sanding down my rough country edges until nothing of me was left. Have you ever sat at a dinner table and felt completely invisible? There was a small dinner party, just a few of her friends. The table was a mile long, set with more forks and spoons than I knew what to do with. The silverware was heavy, real silver. I picked up the wrong one, a large fork for the salad. It was heavier than I expected, and it slipped, clattering against the fine china plate, with a sound that seemed to boom in the sudden silence. Sarah let out a little tinkling laugh. "Oh, Betty, darling," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "We're using the Tiffany silver tonight, not the tin forks from the diner." The table chuckled, polite, uncomfortable laughter. Jack smiled, bless his heart. He didn't hear the venom. He thought it was a harmless joke, but I heard it. I felt it land in my chest like a cold, smooth stone. I just picked up the fork, set it down, and smiled back at her. But I knew that in her eyes, I would always be the woman with cracked hands from a coal mining town. I was a part of a story she liked to tell, but I wasn't a person she wanted in her life. The wedding was held in a museum, not a church, a museum, a grand hall with ceilings so high they seemed to touch the heavens, and floors of polished marble that reflected the glittering chandeliers. It was filled with strangers in shimmering gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. They all laughed a certain way, an easy, carefree sound that belongs only to people who have never had to worry about a bill they couldn't pay. I stood near the back trying to be small. I wore a pale blue dress Jack had insisted on buying for me, the most expensive thing I had ever owned. I felt like a child playing dress-up. I was watching my son on a small stage, his face glowing with happiness as he gave a toast, and I felt a pang of something that wasn't quite pride. It was a feeling of distance, like I was watching his life through one of those spotless windows in his penthouse. That's when I saw the boy, a young caterer, no older than 20, struggling with a massive tray piled high with champagne flutes. It was too heavy for him. I could see the strain in his shoulders, the wobble in his hands. He was going to drop it. I knew it in my bones. The mother in me took over. It's an instinct, you know, the same one that makes you reach for a falling glass or steady a wobbly chair. Before I even thought about it, I was moving toward him. "Let me help you, son," I said quietly. "That looks too heavy." Relief washed over his young face. I put my hands on the edge of the tray, steadying it. For a moment, it was fine. But as I stepped back, my sensible low heel caught on the edge of a thick, ornate rug. The stumble was so small, so insignificant, but it was enough. The tray tipped, and then the world seemed to move in slow motion, a cascade of crystal and gold, a dozen champagne flutes tumbling through the air. They didn't just fall. They crashed right into Sarah's pristine white silk gown. The champagne splashed across her dress like a wave, soaking the delicate fabric, dripping onto the pristine marble floor. And that's when the silence fell. The silence that came right before the slap. Sarah looked down at her ruined dress, her face contorting into a mask of pure fury. And she screamed, "What the hell did you do, you stupid, clumsy backwater woman? Do you have any idea what this dress costs? You've ruined my wedding." The rest is history, as they say. Jack's quiet, icy words. His walk across the room right past his new wife as if she wasn't even there. The way he knelt beside me on that cold floor, taking off his own expensive tuxedo jacket and draping it over my trembling shoulders. He didn't say a word to me. He didn't have to. He just helped me to my feet, his hand a firm, warm presence on my arm. Then he turned, walked back to the microphone on the stage, and looked out at the sea of stunned, silent faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Thank you for coming. The reception is over." He paused, and his eyes found Sarah's, her face a mess of white shock and dawning horror. And so he added, his voice dropping just enough for the microphone to catch it. "Is my marriage." Someone, a guest with a phone, had recorded the whole thing. The slap, Sarah's scream, Jack's calm, devastating announcement. Within an hour, it was on the internet. They called it the wedding slap. It was everywhere. My face, streaked with shame and champagne, was on a loop on TMZ. Suddenly, the whole world knew my story. They dug into my past, finding the coal town, the records of Robert's death, my 3 jobs. They turned me into some kind of saint. A symbol of motherly sacrifice. And the more they loved me, the more they despised Sarah. The luxury brands she represented dropped her. The charities she sat on the boards of politely asked her to resign. Her old money family couldn't protect her from the court of public opinion. She was destroyed professionally and socially by a 2-minute video clip. I never wanted any of it. I asked Jack to make it stop, but he said it was out of his hands. "Mom," he told me, "people need to believe that cruelty has consequences. They need to believe that kindness matters." We left New York for a while, went to a quiet house he owned upstate, where the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the crackle of a fire. He wanted to sue her, to ruin her financially as well, but I asked him not to. She had lost enough. He had already ruined her with 3 simple words. "She is my mother." Months passed. The world, as it always does, moved on to the next scandal. We returned to the penthouse, but things were different. Jack was different. He came home from work earlier. We started cooking dinner together, simple meals like I used to make back in West Virginia. We'd sit on the couch and watch old black and white movies, the kind I grew up with. Sometimes he'd fall asleep with his head in my lap. And I'd sit there in the soft glow of the television, stroking his hair, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. But my hands still needed to be busy. It's just how I'm made. So I started volunteering at a soup kitchen in Brooklyn. It was a small, humble place run by a church, serving hot meals to anyone who came through the door. The people there, their faces etched with worry and hardship, they reminded me of home. I didn't tell them who I was or who my son was. I was just Betty, the lady who chopped vegetables and wasn't afraid to scrub the big soup pots. It felt good. It felt real. One afternoon, I was at my station serving stew when a woman stepped out of the line and approached the counter directly. I looked up, ready to tell her to wait her turn, and my breath caught in my throat. I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair, once so perfect, was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore no makeup, and her face was pale and thin. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple dark coat. It was Sarah. She stood there a few feet from me, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. She wasn't in the line for food, she had come here for me. "Mrs. Johnson, Betty," she began, her voice barely a whisper. I heard from someone that you volunteered here. I had to come. I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I had to see you." I saw the tears welling in her eyes, but these were different from the wedding tears. Not hysterical or performative. These were the quiet, broken tears of a woman who had lost everything, most importantly herself. "I was so wrong," she whispered, a tear finally breaking free and tracing a path down her cheek. "So cruel and so blind. I was obsessed with status, with a perfect image, and I destroyed everything that mattered. I don't expect you to forgive me. I had to tell you that I am so, so sorry." I stood there holding the ladle, looking at this woman who had humiliated me, and I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange, aching pity. She wasn't a monster. She was just a person who had made a terrible mistake and was now living in the wreckage. I didn't offer her empty words. I didn't tell her it was okay because it wasn't. But I could do something else. I set the ladle down, took a clean bowl, and filled it with the hot, thick stew. I added a piece of fresh bread. I walked around the counter and placed the warm bowl directly into her trembling hands. "Everyone makes mistakes, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Forgiveness is the easy part. It's living in a way that doesn't require it that's hard. Now eat. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders." She stared down at the bowl as if it were a life raft, tears splashing into the stew. She nodded, unable to speak, and went to sit at an empty table in the corner, and she ate. I didn't watch her, but I felt something in the room shift, like the first thaw after a long, bitter winter. That night, Jack found me standing on the balcony of the penthouse. The city glittered below us, a breathtaking tapestry of lights, but I wasn't looking at the view. I was holding the only photograph I had brought with me from West Virginia. It was old and faded, the corners soft with age. It was a picture of me and Robert taken just after he'd finished a shift. We were young, our faces smudged with coal dust, our arms around each other. We looked tired, but we were smiling. We were happy. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Jack asked, coming to stand beside me. I looked down at my hands in the city light. They're wrinkled now, spotted with age. The calluses have faded, but they're still there, a permanent memory of a life of labor. These hands that had scrubbed floors and mended clothes. These hands that had begged a principal for an extension and sold the last precious things my husband had left behind. These hands that had built a life ounce by ounce out of nothing but grit and love. I smiled, a real smile, and held them up for him to see. "I was just thinking," I said softly. "These hands, they were once black with coal dust, then raw from bleach. But they built a good man, and that's all that ever really mattered." Jack took my hands in his. His own hands are strong and capable, the hands of a man who builds empires on a computer screen. But he held mine so gently, like they were the most precious things in the world. And then he raised them to his lips and kissed each one, first the right, then the left. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. In that single silent gesture, I felt the gratitude of a lifetime. We sat there for a long time, mother and son, as the city hummed its endless song below. We talked about the past, about the future, about the things that truly matter. He thanked me, not for the sacrifice, but for teaching him what money can't buy. Kindness, humility, and the quiet strength to choose love over pride. Looking at him, my brilliant, good-hearted son, I knew every aching back, every raw finger, every swallowed tear had been worth it. My hands hadn't built an empire of glass and steel. They had built something far more lasting. They had built a soul. If this story touched something in your heart, I ask you to do one small thing. Call your mother. Call the person who raised you with calloused hands and tired eyes. Tell them you remember. Tell them their sacrifices mattered. Don't wait, because in the end all that truly remains of us is the love we gave and the hands that built the next generation. Leave a comment below and tell me about the person who sacrificed for you. Their stories deserve to be heard. And if you believe that stories of quiet strength and a mother's love still matter in this loud world, I hope you'll subscribe because they do, and so do you.